Vancouver West End.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, I rise today to speak in steadfast support of this legislation and in support of proportional representation in general. And I do that because I believe in hope, I believe in the people of British Columbia, and I believe we get more when we involve more people, not less. I believe we get a better democracy when more people have power rather than fewer people having power, as has been the case under our current first-past-the-post system. Now, Honourable Speaker, this legislation, although many who've spoken on it before haven't really addressed the specifics of this legislation, choosing to speak more broadly about proportional representation or first-past-the-post, as I will do later, is legislation that, I should be clear, gives people a choice. So if we move to proportional representation, as I hope we do, people will get a chance to vote again on if they want to move back to the current system we have. It's almost, as they might say, a money-back guarantee, a return to sender on delivery if you don't like what you've got. You get a chance to try it out before you buy it long-term. And I think that's a good thing, Honourable Speaker. Our democracy is not perfect. No party is perfect. No process is perfect. But people want a chance for change. My citizens, my constituents, they voted consistently in support of changing to single transferable vote. They believe that that was a good idea. And when I walk the streets of my community, I hear again and again and again support for a change of a system to proportional representation, a system where you would get a chance to work more collaboratively with parties across the spectrum. And you know, Honourable Speaker, it's not just me as a New Democrat MLA for Vancouver West End supporting this. I just read the BC Conservative Party has said they too support this change. I know my colleagues in the BC Green Party support this change. And Honourable Speaker, I would tell you, to the horror of my colleagues opposite, I've had a number of BC Liberal colleagues, friends, neighbours in my community come to me and say they support this too, and they're ashamed that their political party, the BC Liberal Party, is trying to stop it, because they too want a legislature where people will work more closely together, where you don't have a system where those who win one more vote than the other win all the power, where you don't have a situation where somebody who might have been elected, as in some provinces, who win maybe 32% of the vote, win the majority of the seats in a legislature, the majority of the power, even though the vast majority of the population vote against them. Now, I know many folks have spoken about how they work colorblind, as they might say. They don't look at who people have voted for in order to help them. That may be true on an individual level, Honourable Speaker, but I think the legislature and legislators have to admit that obviously we each have our own biases. We each bring our own values to an argument. And so to seem to suggest that somehow if you had a Liberal majority or a New Democrat majority or a Green majority government, Conservative majority, that somehow that majority government of that one partisan hue will somehow also act as a party for everybody else who didn't vote for them, often in some cases cross purposes with what they own believe. It's just not sensible. That's why the electoral system actually has to represent the values of who has voted. You know, Honourable Speaker, we've had many circumstances in our legislature where people win power and they don't have a majority of the votes. In fact, far from it. And sometimes they have fewer votes than the second party, than the opposition party. That has happened in our history. And instead of voting as a majority and trying to control everything, as has happened in the past, I would plead for humility. I would plead for a system that actually got them to work with everybody else in the House to try and develop a better, more broad collaborative approach to government. So it's not just I win, you lose, or yes or no, but sometimes there's a third option. Sometimes there's a better value that can come out of collaboration with people. Because no party has a monopoly on good ideas, Honourable Speaker. No party knows everything. I tend to believe that my party, the New Democrats, have the best balance, but I know that there's great ideas on all sides, and even in parties that aren't currently elected in this House have much to add to the debate. Just like we work as neighbours, just like we work in our communities, I would hope we could bring into this House for a change, rather than, you know, if we brought the kind of values, the kind of belief we have in this House back to all our neighbours, you'd have people bickering and fighting and way more than you would ever have today. Instead, people in our home communities go, let's collaborate. I don't say, well, you're a Liberal, you're a New Democrat, we won more seats than you, haha, I don't have to listen to you. No, that would be political suicide for one thing, but it would also give to really, really bad politics. But that's what I hear being argued for. We want, I understand there's those who campaign for a system of first past the post, the current system we have, which sets up false majorities, which sets up one vote more getting all the power, and everybody else, even if it's a majority of the population of British Columbia voting for a different vision, they don't get to sit in the seats of government. They don't get to make those decisions. They sit, in many cases, outside the doors here, arguing and upset that their government's not listening or following their values. This happened again and again and again over the last 16 years, and it's one of the reasons that the former Premier, Gordon Campbell, acknowledged that we needed to look at these issues years ago. My community voted in favor of change. They wanted a fix. They wanted us to acknowledge that every vote should count and that we should collaborate, not be afraid of each other. Because what we hear now is a campaign of fear about the future and fear about each other as neighbors, fear about, oh my God, we're going to have radicalization, and trying to spin these fears that somehow we will fall apart as a society if we have to collaborate. Honorable Speaker, that's the farthest thing from the truth of what would happen. Because when you actually collaborate, when you actually have to listen to the battle of ideas, to listen to the values each other share, and have them adequately represented in the legislature, you learn from each other. You learn. You learn who you disagree with, sure. You're not always going to agree, but you actually have to listen to each other. And people, I think, will get more greatly involved in their democracy if they see that their votes truly count. Not just that you mathematically count them, sure, but that they actually count here in terms of who sits in this chamber. You'll have more young people involved for sure, Honorable Speaker, because the number of times I've heard from people who say, well, I live in a Liberal riding where it goes Liberal all the time, I'm not voting because my person will never get in, or a New Democrat or a Green. The party label doesn't matter, Honorable Speaker. People feel they get shut out of this House if their party is not adequately represented. And I understand that. I know for many years there were large numbers of people, 10%, 17%, 20% or more in this province who were shut out 100%. Their voice is not heard in these halls at all. And that I would hope members would, across these communities, would agree is wrong. It would be saying to your community, if you had a community meeting, well, 30% of you, I don't agree with your view. You're not even allowed in the door of this community hall because your voice don't matter. I got one more vote than you, and you didn't get any, so sorry, you're out the door. That's not how democracy should work. But unfortunately, in first past the post, we create it because of the mathematical formulas of majority, not even majority, pluralities, that you can win just because you got one vote more than the other next runner-up, even if that next runner-up only got 20% of the vote, only got 15%. As long as you get that one vote more, you win all the power, even if the vast majority of your community voted against what that value and belief that you hold is. And that's wrong. Honorable Speaker, that's why I want to change, but that's also why I want a referendum to give people a chance to change back. Because really, I get it, there's fear. Change happens, and that's not easy. We don't always understand every single element of what change we're moving to. And I think it's important that we give people that opportunity to say, okay, either it didn't work or it did, and they get to choose, just like they did in New Zealand. And for those who are saying, well, the systems that you want to change to proportional representation, it's so confusing. Oh my God, it's not going to work. Nobody knows how to do it. Nobody can vote. Oh, it's so confusing. The vast majority of the world uses this system, Honorable Speaker. Most of the economies that are doing well in the world use this system. Most of the economies in the world that have some of the best life expectancies use the system. Most of the economies and countries in the world that have the greatest electoral participation use this system. So it's not a hard system to understand unless you want to suggest that our population can't understand what the vast majority of the world does understand. And I don't think that's true, Honorable Speaker. I know our population understands being involved, collaboration, having their values count in this House. And that's why in so many communities they did vote in support of changes before, and why people tell me they want to vote in support of change now. And it's not partisan. If it's partisan, and I know I hear this from all of my colleagues across the way, that this is just about getting a certain party elected. Oh, it's just about trying to trick the system. Well, some would suggest that this is all about the BC Liberals being afraid that a BC Conservative party might make a breakthrough, and many of their members would like to abandon their party to the BC Conservatives and their supporters and their voters. That's what the BC Conservatives argue, that's why the Liberals are afraid of this. So if you want to get partisan and argue it's just about two parties wanting to get elected, then I think that you've got to acknowledge that there's a partisan interest here for the BC Liberals to try to maintain the current system because they're afraid of the BC Conservative Party. They're afraid that many of their members would like to and supporters would vote BC Conservative if they had a better chance of getting into this House. Don't believe me? Okay, well, let's look to the former Premier. The former Premier, Christy Clark, was on a podcast the other day. She's reappeared in the media, is making her presence felt. And there she was asked about the BC Liberal Party, who they are, and the argument that she made around why they have to stick together in this kind of first-past-the-post system, that they wouldn't look at things like women's rights issues, access to choice, LGBT rights, transgender folks' access to bathrooms, because that would split their party in two. The BC Conservatives and those that don't support those values would go somewhere else, and other parties would then win in British Columbia. So they don't talk about those issues, is what she said on the podcast. And it shocked me that it was that brazen, that the former Premier would come out and just say that there were certain issues some members of our party don't support, like my own human rights, and thus they just don't talk about them because it might give my party, the New Democrat Party, a better chance of getting elected. Well, I was shocked to hear that, Honourable Speaker. She herself said she was a supporter of LGBT human rights, but that she wouldn't act on them because there were a few members that sit across the way who don't support those human rights. Well, Honourable Speaker, it sounds to me like there's a certain extremist value that is still at home in a first-past-the-post system. It's just hidden. It's just hidden in a political party that they try to hide it and don't move forward on any values that might divide that interest for power, for crass partisan power. You know, Honourable Speaker, I would prefer to see that kind of value, rather than hiding in the background, being able to influence the government of the day, be right out there and visible. You can't fight extremism if it hides, Honourable Speaker. And I think rather than hiding it in a first-past-the-post system, we got to name it so that we can fight it and we can bring it down. Because I don't believe the vast majority of British Columbians support those kind of extremist values. And I would rather that we get to be clear on that and fight it at its source, because I'm not afraid of taking on that battle, Honourable Speaker. That battle only wins in the shadows. Extremism only wins when they're hidden. Racism, sexism, all the various otherisms, they only win when you're in the shadows and you're unknown. You know, I think first past the post allows that to be hidden and sometimes to show its face when a minority of the population win majority power, as we are seeing in some jurisdictions down south of us, of course, where the president is preying on racism and other things to divide a country because he hopes he can get that one extra vote to win majority power, even though he doesn't, in many cases, have a majority of the voters. It's just that one extra vote above everybody else who gets shut out. We're seeing that in some of the other provinces. I think Ontario, for example, won a majority of the power with a minority of the votes. They didn't win all the votes, and again, are using that power to push more of a radical agenda than I think the people of Ontario thought that they were getting or hoped for based on their actual votes. So, Honourable Speaker, I think it's clear to me that proportional representation is a better path. It's going to lead to a more moderate politics than we've seen in BC, swinging one way or another. It's going to force politicians to be more humble, to listen to their constituents, to listen to other members in this House more often, to try and pick up the best values that each of us have, negotiate, and bring that back to our constituents of what we've worked for, who we've worked with. I believe it'll force us to bring the better out of each other as opposed to the worst. Because if you have a winner-takes-all system, Honourable Speaker, where it just takes one more point, one more punch, one more slight way over the top than the other guy, you fight for every last inch. You crawl, you scratch, you do whatever thing. If you're in that kind of life or death, I win, you lose situation. But if you're in a situation where you have to negotiate with other people, you play better in the sandbox. We see it in elementary schools, kindergartens. We see that with our own kids. It's better when you share. It's better when you listen to other values as opposed to say, well, you got to the top of the pile. Too bad everybody else falls away. You don't have to listen to them. You are the commander-in-chief. You are the king of the castle. That's how I think you get it to a situation of widening inequality, of might makes right, of power over the many by the few. It's not how you get to a system of more democracy, more equality, more fairness, and more togetherness and community. That's how I think we need to move. We need to be moving towards a more proportional system and giving people that chance to try it out and giving them that chance to say whether they thought it was a good idea or not after they've seen it in practice. And you know what, Honourable Speaker? I think that's about giving our constituents credit, giving our beliefs that they can make that choice, just as we've given them the ability to make a choice in this referendum through a ballot, a simple ballot. You fill it out, you've got your questions. You can say, do you want proportional representation or first past the post? When you get to that second ballot that we're voting on today around this referendum, you get that question. Do you want to move back to the former system, or do you want to stay with proportional representation? Fairly simple, Honourable Speaker. And I trust that people can make that decision. And they will vote as they want to, as they see the need to. And I think they will vote in support, is my hope, and at least in my community, that's been the history, is that they do believe we can work together, and that a change of the system, instead of one power for one person, let's bring power to many people. You know, again, no party has a monopoly on good ideas. Let's make this legislature work more collaboratively. Let's make it so that the leader of the opposition or the leader of the government, or whatever the stripe may be, can't get away with name calling and other such things as we've seen recently in this House. Because in fact, they actually have to work together and have a level of respect for each other. You know, all this stuff that I've heard about throwing derision on other members as being somehow beholden, it's all about their self-interest. Well, look at yourself in the mirror. You know, everybody has a belief, a bias, a value. Some people are afraid. I get that. Some people think the first past the post system is the best system ever. Some people think proportional representation is the best system ever. I would appeal to us, I think, to try and raise the bar on this and say, do we think this system gets the best right out of us right now? I don't think it does. Do our constituents deserve better? I think they do. And I think in so many of our communities, we already operate this way in practice. Why don't we update the legislature so the legislature can work with the way we try and work in our communities, which is listening to each other, collaborating, and trying to get the best out of our community, as opposed to might makes right, I won, you lost, divisive polarization of politics, which we see far too much of in this day and age. Let's get people involved. Let's involve them in this process. Let's vote for change, and let's give people that chance so that they too, down the road, can vote if they want to return to the system. It's only fair, Honourable Speaker. Previous governments in this province, in this legislature, just changed the system without any vote. You go back in the, I think it was what led to the creation of the Social Credit Party. They voted for a change to a version of single transferable vote because they thought it would serve their best political interests. They didn't even have a referendum. They just changed the system. That's what they're doing in Quebec, Honourable Speaker. They're just voting to change the system. I ran, and I said very explicitly to my constituents, as did all New Democrats, and I know the Greens did as well, that we did want to change. We committed to a referendum. I know the Greens just wanted to change the system, and I guess had they won a majority, they would have just changed the system without a vote. We felt it was important to give people a vote, to give them a referendum, to give them a chance to have their say. We're having that referendum now because in order to have the system ready to go for votes in the upcoming election, we had to have that vote now. And so I'm glad we're fulfilling that promise. It's a promise that many constituents told me they were glad we made. Some of them told me we should just do it. Just boom, bring in proportional representation. I said we should give people a chance to vote on it, to be clear on their intentions of where their values are going. We're doing that now. And secondly, Honourable Speaker, I said to my constituents that I wanted them to have a chance to vote on it again down the road so that they could test it out, see if they wanted to make that change. And you know what? They appreciated that. And I heard from BC Liberal voters, Conservatives, Independents, Greens, New Democrats, what have you. People who didn't even know who they support, they change their views all the time. And they said that they liked that guarantee. They liked that argument. They liked that we were going to put it into legislation, put it into law, so that down the road a future government is going to have that referendum and that it's clear. Because I think that's the kind of thing that we should be doing. Nobody is infallible. Everybody makes mistakes. But let's trust in the people of British Columbia. Let's give them the chance to have first this referendum and vote, and give them a chance to vote again down the road. I believe in them. I hope that this House believes in our citizens as well, to choose to their best ability so that we can all work in their interests. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.